All right, boys and girls, it says I'm live. So if you're here and you're in the chat, let me know if that is in fact the case. Coming to you from Chicago, Illinois, by O'Hare Airport, in a hotel. That's about all there is to that. And we are here with another live stream. I need to know if you can see me, if you can hear me, if I do or don't sound like a robot. I don't know if I can solve that problem if I do, but please tell me. It says I have an excellent connection, though occasionally I get these weird notices that say that there's an issue with my audio's bit rate, which doesn't really make sense. But one of these days, maybe Lightstream, which I use, will give me some information about that. If there's anybody here, let me know that you are here, and welcome to another episode of Gearbox 2.0. We are not doing Cameron Flash today because I will be on an airplane traveling home. The most ridiculous travel day I've had in many, many years, probably in a decade plus, getting to Chicago on Monday. First real storm of the year, but the real problem I found out later on was when I was in PDX, waiting for my 6:50 a.m. flight, that a plane ran off the runway, skidded off the runway. Nobody was hurt, but I was on an American flight. That was an American flight, and it apparently grounded all the flights in O'Hare. And so we left 5 or 6 hours after we were supposed to. At least I got in. I was able to teach my workshop yesterday, which I enjoyed. The Hitmen, welcome. Good morning, Travis. You're traveling as well. Where are you? And can everybody see and hear me? Most importantly, at the beginning of the stream. I don't know what this enhanced internet actually is here at my Marriott, but hopefully it's good enough that the picture is decent and that the sound is fine. So if I could get a confirmation on that, that would be awesome. And then we can jump into this. I think this is going to be about 45 minutes in total. I do have to finish packing over there. I do have to get ready and then go to the airport. But I do have time this morning to at least do Gearbox. Heading home from Disney World, awesome. You can hear me, which is good. You can see me, which is great. And today we're going to talk about lighting. And this is sort of thoughts on lighting a little bit, but I really wanted to do this episode to answer your questions. So if you're thinking about buying or renting particular fixtures for projects and you want some advice on that, put an @the C47 in the chat here so I know that you're asking a particular question to me and that you want me to put attention on that, and I'll do that. Aldo, come on. Donkey Donuts, what are you doing here? You can't say that it actually sounds good, Mr. Audio Maestro, but it sounds okay. I've got a lav here. You know, it's in about the right place. And I'm using the Wireless Go system into an X-T3 with a 35mm lens. And we're going to rely upon this camera. I'm pressing record because the AF works a lot better when you do that. And I'm shooting in f2. This has nothing to do with anything, but I'm just telling you. Okay, and that's how you kind of get a little bit of fall off behind me with these curtains. You got to shoot pretty wide open. Okay, so what do we got? Let's get into the chat. First and foremost, I have been working recently on redesigning my whole lighting workshop. So it's been a work in progress sort of since NAB, and it's getting, I think, more and more to where I want it to be. But there's still work to be done. But rest assured that by NAB in April, my small to no crew cinematic video lighting workshop will be a lot different than it has been in the past. Sure, there's going to be some similar lighting setups, but the approach to how we get into everything, and I think how much can be learned in that one day, is going to expand, which is always the intention. You always want your education as an educator to get better. You definitely don't want to get into ruts, and that can happen very easily because it's working, you're getting great feedback. People grow, not physically, but in terms of their craft. And you find that based on what people are learning online and the things that they're getting from other places, that you really have to look at what you're doing as an educator and continue to not only get better at your craft and your technical knowledge, but also get better at how you're teaching a particular subject matter. So that's going to happen with my lighting workshop. It's also going to happen with my small to no crew corporate and in-house workshop. So those are both in sort of a process of being redesigned in terms of how that education is done. And I'm toying with the idea for 2020 of actually creating in-depth lighting and sort of small to no crew production videos, a series. And how I do that and the way I approach doing that will kind of be informed by how these live workshops get put together and the materials that I'm starting to put together for those. And I'm still not there, but again, by NAB in April, I think we'll have pretty tight workshops that will be a lot different than they were even at NAB 2019. So I am super excited about that. And part of that is being driven by my growth and sort of where I want to go in terms of learning lighting and controlling lighting and all of that stuff. So there's that little snapshot, and perfect timing. Travis now has a question. What do you think about RGB lights? Do you think they're becoming must-haves in people's lighting kits or more of a specialty light? I think that's a great question. So there's a recent episode of Indie Mogul where my friends, I guess I can call them friends, Ted from Aputure and Tim from Quasar, really talk about the science of RGB lights and how they are interpreted by camera systems. And I always had this viewpoint that when we move forward with being able to capture, which we already can, but be able to capture and display wider color gamut, we will be able to reproduce more accurately the colors that are being emitted from RGB lights, red, green, and blue diodes in particular. And just sort of a quick background, and then I'll get into some other stuff. When you talk about LED technology, the beginnings of LED technology was really, for us, the daylight balanced LED. And what the initial technology essentially was you basically had surface mounted LEDs. Essentially what you had is usually a blue LED emitter. What's up, Zlatko? And there was a phosphor compound, usually mixed into some sort of resin, that was sitting directly on the surface of the diode. And what would happen is that blue LED would hit that phosphor, daylight balanced for that mixture, and it would excite the phosphor, and it would essentially emit a daylight color temperature. Now, the problem with the initial LEDs was that low CRI, TLCI, all that stuff. But what that really means in real world terms is there were some pretty big gaps in terms of, and there still are, in terms of color spectrum being reproduced. But that has gone way, way up with LED technology now. But also part of the problem was that the initial sort of run of LEDs almost always skewed to green and a green spike. So very oftentimes manufacturers, light panels, would have magenta sitting on there. They would not only pull the best runs of LEDs, but they would essentially correct them for us in those original 1x1s so that we weren't seeing that green spike. It's not unsimilar to fluorescent technology, where you have some sort of emitter inside of generally a tube, and then that is sprayed with phosphor, which gets excited and it creates a color temperature. And of course, we know how green and sickly many fluorescent lights have been historically. KinoFlow being the company that changed all of that in terms of production, producing consistent at full output or intensity color temperatures for both tungsten, warmer light, daylight, bluer light. And there you go. So, yeah. All right. I agree with you, Zlatko. I'm very excited about 32-bit float audio. So there's that. And then, of course, we started to get bicolor, where basically you had surface mount with both daylight phosphor and tungsten or warmer phosphor. Now we're having other combinations where it's even warmer than 3200 Kelvin, 2800 Kelvin, and then the cooler color is not a 5600 Kelvin. It could be even like a 7500 Kelvin. And then when you mix these two together, you can get really even cooler color temperatures or warmer. And there's all kinds of combinations. Then we come to RGB. The initial RGB lights were just red, green, blue diodes, no phosphor, and you would mix them in combination to create other colors. And then in theory, when you mix them together in totality, you would get a white color. Pretty horrible white. And as I said, my feeling was with that and also other variations of RGB that we have now, RGB plus white, which would basically be red, green, blue diodes, then a blue diode surface mounted with, let's say, a white color, so you can get a true white in there. Then you have RGBWW, which is white, white, or sometimes AW, amber white is the way they call it. So you have a warmer diode and with phosphor, and then not a warmer diode. You have a warmer phosphor and then a cooler phosphor. So when you're creating white light, it can be very true, but then you can use the RGB to create colors and all that kind of stuff. So my feeling was, this is a long answer, and I'll go to Rob. I'll see. Well, okay, good. So is that basically when you're combining these red, green, blue, that if we go to larger color gamut, so you're not capturing in Rec 709, but you're doing P3 or 2020 or even a cinema style gamut, that as long as the display technology caught up, we would be able to see the colors that were being captured by cameras that were what we were seeing with our eyes. Because now we were in a wider gamut. We're getting closer to what we can see with our human eye. But just understand that P3 is only about 45%, and even 2020 is 78% or so of what we can see in terms of gamut, in terms of color spectrum. So that was my thought. And then I had some conversations with Tim from Quasar, and he's kind of the color science guy over there. He's also an accomplished DP cinematographer, and watched that video on Indie Mogul and really started to understand that the problem just isn't about having a wider gamut for capture and display. It's the way the camera interprets that basically light that's being emitted from true red, green, and blue diodes. So there's a lot of crap happening right now when it comes to creating color with LED technology. And I think we're kind of in an LED 3.0 start point now, or maybe we're at 4.0. We could say that the initial was daylight, then we had bicolor, then we had RGB, and now we're having like RGB part 2, which is if you look at the orbiter and you start to read the writing on the wall, the tea leaves, whatever it is that you want to, the tarot cards, you can start to see a trend that's starting to happen with them and Hive and Roscoe, where they're starting to put phosphor that's not our traditional color temperatures to produce daylight and tungsten, but they've got like lime and these other colors that are starting to be mixed to go on top of an emitter, so that the colors that can be produced by the LEDs are, I hope, going to be more predictable to, oh, we see that with our eye, and that's what the camera is capturing. Now, of course, there's a gazillion sensors out there and other stuff, you know. So, what do you mean? This thing's going live 11 a.m. Pacific. Who said that? For reals? I hope not, Leo. Everybody can see me here. So I think we're live. I scheduled it for 9 a.m. Pacific, which should be the time that I am right now, which is I'm at 11:15 a.m. Central Time. So let me know about that, Leo. But I'm having conversations with people. You can hear me, you can see me. So we're just going to go with it, and we'll see what happens. But I did schedule it based on Pacific time, 9 a.m. So hopefully it didn't screw it up. My clock says 9:15 a.m. here, so I'm a little confused by that. All right, Travis, back to your question. So the LED technology that we're getting now, for the most part, seems to be RGBW or RGBWW. And as I said, that can sometimes be put across as AW, amber white. The white being more daylight, the amber being much warmer. We are live, Zlatko. I agree. So, and then we'll see what happens with some of this higher end approach to the way colors are being reproduced from companies. I mean, I would say that Hive was really at the forefront of this, but we have now on the high end, we have ARRI with their orbiter doing something very different than they were doing with the Sky panel, which has been on the market for a long time now, which is RGBW, just a single white LED. And they keep tuning it with firmware and things like that, and they're obviously doing a pretty good job. Some people love them, some people don't. Leo doesn't have a signal, just has the chat. I'm not sure why, but we are here, Leo. So you can talk to me, but we are being seen and heard. Okay, so, and then we have Roscoe with their mix panels, and now they have this little digital swatch book thing, which basically you can pick a color based on the colors that their lights are using. And I don't even necessarily want to call it RGB because, again, we're starting to see these different mixtures. And I think a year from now, maybe even by NAB 2020, we're going to be looking at LED technology and really seeing this evolution. So what I'm hoping is that with the combinations of these new phosphor formulas and approaches to creating the emitted light that's coming from, we'll call it colored LEDs, in terms of LEDs that are producing more than just a white light, but they're creating colors. Maybe it's not going to be right to call them RGB anymore. They might be just color tunable. And so we'll say bicolor, which is basically for your white light, and color tunable, meaning that we can tune colors. And that, of course, includes hue, saturation, intensity, but also being able to do other things. That we'll be getting, you know, with that, and also the wider gamuts and better display technology, which will hopefully be coming from the new monitors from SMALLHD and from ATOMOS, and also from, of course, companies like Flanders Scientific, that we will be able to see something on set, have a pretty accurate idea that that's what's being captured because the monitor has enough gamut. The light emitter, the lights themselves are producing light that the camera can read in terms of the signal properly. It doesn't change blue into purple and all of those other weird things that can happen. And that that we'll start to see that across the boards from manufacturers. So I still haven't answered your question, Travis, but I just wanted to give a little bit of background on that and some of the things that I'm looking at and thinking about when it relates to lights. So from that viewpoint, to sort of answer that question, welcome officially, Leo. The answer is yes and no. So I think that you might want to look at fixtures that are sort of already a little bit ahead of the curve. So RGBWW, so two whites and red-green triangle anyway, and that might make a lot of sense. Also, most CMOS sensors favor daylight color temperature as opposed to tungsten light in terms of a true white light, but there's a lot of advancements that have happened with sensor technology as well. So I'm seeing some pretty interesting things. I think that this Mix 150 light from Nanlite is pretty amazing for $1,100. I'm liking the lights that I'm seeing from Luxli in their 1x1, the timpani, is it timpani light, under $1,000 US. You know, that's just RGBW though. I think that's going to eventually get upgraded to an amber white, so it'll have two whites. The Mix 150 from Nanlite does have two whites. So does a little MC from Aputure, which is their first color tunable and bicolor light. So that is RGB and two whites. So that's a pretty interesting little fixture. For me, in most situations, the way I'm using RGB lights now, or let's say RGB with white or whites lights, is for accents. So it's just to create a little bit of a mood. And obviously, you know, that would be probably most used for me in situations where I'm using it as a background light to actually change the actual color of the background, or to just put a little accent color on a particular thing. It's also could be used just for those out of focus areas, the bokeh areas of an image. So by using two base lights and by using rectangular or square lights, shooting with a shallow depth of field, they can start to break up and create visual interest in the background as visual elements, not just as a wash of color on the background. And when you're thinking about your composition and the frame that you're creating, you should be at very least thinking about subject matter and background as two planes of lighting. But in reality, very oftentimes, especially for narrative, you have to think about foreground, things that are generally out of focus, but maybe passing through frame or across frame or in the frame all of the time. The subject matter, right, which is your middle ground, and then the background, which is anything that sits behind that subject, a person or an object or an area of focus. And so obviously being able to have lights that let you, you know, either create a mood that is contrived, science fiction, high fashion, whatever it is, or that are supposed to simulate other fixtures is really important in tools that we can have in our toolbox. So we can say, okay, we want this to feel like sodium vapor. So if we have a light that lets us tune into and can simulate that, sky panels are very good at that, then that's a big advantage to us. So I think that, you know, those are some thoughts that I have in terms of how you might use those. I absolutely think that lights like the little Luxli Viola 2, the Cello, this MC light from Aputure, these are lights that you shouldn't hesitate in purchasing because they become just additional tools in your toolkit. They can also do some pretty nifty things like, you know, simulate firelight and lightning and other things that are nice to have, which is the other application for this technology. You know, if you want to simulate out of frame that there's a cop car or an ambulance or some sort of emergency vehicle, getting a sky panel, you know, S60 or something equivalent to that, a Gemini 1x2, can be a great tool for recreating that type of style, which is complicated to do without having those tools in your toolkit. I mean, historically, you could take a flicker box, like a magic box or something like that, and you could put your quartz halogen fixtures in there, and essentially it would regulate the intensity randomly so that you could, you know, change things and make it look like it was flickering or look like a fireplace or a television and things like that. But if you wanted a cop car, you kind of had to have a pretty good gag and get some lights and plug those in and have those going that were not LEDs, or you'd have to get a freaking cop car. So I think that you know, that flexibility that we get from those tools is pretty amazing. And sometimes those lights don't need to have tremendous output to play the gag. You know, you can get a 1x1, even this little cello light, which is, you know, this 10-inch light, positioned in the right place out of frame, can produce something really interesting overall as far as those gags. So I think that's it. I don't know who this Gem guy is with a G, but I'm going to let it go. Droid Media says, can't wait to see just lights in like 5 years being fully color tunable, no bicolor RGB labels. Yeah, it's going to be exciting. Thoughts on the upcoming Aputure Nova 300C? Tyler asks. Thoughts are, I'm excited to actually see this sucker for real. And if the MC is any indication, I'm assuming it's going to be RGBWW. It's going to be priced well, and I'm hoping that it just has really good output for its size. I'm looking for, you know, in a light like that, I want at least 150 watt, maybe even more power draw, because I want to be able to get output. For me, the whole goal is, you know, give me a light that's relatively compact. I mean, I'm still in love with flex lights and, you know, the ability to be able to travel with those 1x1, 1x2 lights. And give me as much output as I can get out of those lights, hopefully silent, and I'll do the rest. And I most of the time want those to be lights that have lenses on them, or have the ability to be relatively focused, because I can always take something that's a little bit harder and a little bit more focused, and I can make it softer and broader. But you can only go so far if you start with something that is very broad. Now, of course, we're seeing some other exciting things starting to happen. Again, you know, tip my hat to Hive, who was really in the plasma game and then finally started to shift their focus onto LEDs. Not only did they do some things that I thought were a little bit ahead of the curve, and I think Quasar is doing a good job of this as well, when it comes to color and color tunability, but they were pretty ahead of the game when they started to look at taking with an adapter mount their 100C light and being able to add a mini source 4. And so what that does is it takes something that's a relatively broad, hard light, and because chip-on boards or COB lights are kind of that, and putting it through optics so that you can get a more concentrated and cleaner and harder light. And the problem is right now, and you know, I'm just going to keep complaining about this till the cows come home, which they won't. Pigs won't fly, and all of that fun stuff. But I love dado lights, and I have had a 3-light, you know, quartz halogen focusable dado light kit for a long time. And when they started to make their dado LEDs, I was very excited about them. The problem is, and it's not a problem, but it is, they have a patent on their focusing technology and their lensing technology that they use with their lights. And what that allows you to do, both with just the light as it is, and then also by attaching lenses so you can add gobos or go-betweens and things like that, is have a very compact light that now has relatively good output. I think they're up to at least a 90 watt draw on a really compact head. And you can really hone in on and get very specific spotted light and hard light from their fixtures. The only way we're starting to be able to do that right now with other LEDs, which are chip-on-board technology, is by putting in front of it things like the Aputure Spotlight, which allows you to currently put a 19, a 26, and a 36-degree lens in there. It takes the light that's being produced that's very broad and hard from that chip-on-board, and it puts it through a huge lens element, piece of glass, and it focuses that in, and then you can, with the other piece of glass, essentially focus or basically feather that light. And then you can put go-betweens, and you can put an iris to open and close it. I wish it closed all the way to nothing, but it doesn't. And I think that overall, that's really the thing that is the biggest change besides the color evolution with these lights, is that we're starting to see a lot of options come in to create harder light. Get your act together, Dado. We love you in terms of what you're producing as far as a product. Get a distributor here in the United States where we can actually afford these lights. And maybe as a company, they don't care, But in reality, if dados were competitive with the other lights that are on the market, they would have their own lane that nobody else has. And I would love to own 2 or 3 of their higher end dado LEDs that are bicolor. I would use them all of the time as specials and things like that. Currently, I'm using, and I love the FIILEX P360, but it's not really focusable. You can put a Fresnel on there, but it just does not give you the precise control that you get out of a dado light. And you have to go with a Mini Source 4 on a Hive, or you have to go with the Spotlight on an Aputure light in order to get really that precision. And let's go, dado, please. I'm talking to you. Let's get that thing figured out so we can start to talk about your lights some more, and that people out there who are owner operators can actually afford them. Okay, so Tyler says if it'll give, he's talking about the Nova 300C that's coming out from Aputure, if it'll give more output than the S30, S30C from SkyPanel, you'd be really happy. Planning on getting one, love working with the S30, but pricey. Yes, I mean, you know, everything from the Gemini lights up to the SkyPanels are great tools to use in production for the vast majority of people. They're rental. And as a rental item, they're actually very affordable. And there's quite a lot of them out there on the market now. You have to realize that the S30 is the baby pin version. It's got a lot of output, especially if you put the intensifier in front of there to basically take the beam angle and reduce it, make it more intense. It's relatively compact, but you know, everything is separate parts. I mean, you control the light from the head, but you have the power supply as a separate unit, but it can sit right on the back of the light. The 60 is, as is the Gemini 2x1 or 1x2, is a junior. So you've got a junior coming out of there. So you need a junior receiver in terms of your stand when you are using that. And it's quite a bit heavier. What's the typical lifespan of LED lights? Hey, please put an at the C47 with your questions, because then I'll just like boom right to the thing. And I don't have to hunt and peck if you put at the C47 there. So what's a typical lifespan of LED lights? About 50,000 hours. Some say 80,000. The technology has something to do with it. You know, what happens with surface mount LEDs is you've got a lot of heat being generated by those diodes. LEDs produce a lot of heat, actually. It's just not generally felt by the talent. And surface mount is going to degrade over time a lot faster than something like a remote phosphor technology, which is not being pushed that much right now, but is great for consistent one color temperature lights. So if you're setting up a studio and you know everything's going to be 3200 Kelvin, what you do is you have all the blue diodes here, right? And then you have a panel, a single panel that is separated with space between the diodes and the actual phosphor. And then it still gets excited and it blooms that light out 120 or 160 degrees or whatever the angle is. And it's a beautiful soft light. And those lights will generally not degrade in terms of color as quickly as surface mount, though there have been a lot of things that have happened in terms of that technology over time that have advanced it. So there you go. So let me see. Nanlite Forza light. Oh my God, that 500, bonkers. We were using it in the workshop yesterday. I have one coming in to Oregon soon for the money, about $2,000 US. My only real complaint right now with that light is it's daylight only, but the output, the color that I'm seeing coming out of it is just phenomenal. Very well designed, very pro. And I love the controller boxes and all-in-one. It needs 26 volt, 10 amp batteries and 2 of those to really run that light. But 500 watt draw, so 2 of those on a 10 amp circuit. Come on, outrageous. Bowens mounts, so use Bowen modifiers with it. Could be pretty exciting. And I like their Mix 150 again. I think it's pretty good. They have this kind of diffusion technology where you can see all of the LEDs, and then of course that'll cast multiple shadows, RGBWW. They make a 60 and a 150 model. I think the 150 is the one to look at seriously. It's about $1,100, a lot of output from it. But then you press this button and it goes soft and it's like edge lit and it looks diffused. It's not active diffusion. It's just a different way of approaching how the light's coming out of it. Love that thing. Pretty awesome stuff going on. So again, give me an @the_C47 when you're asking questions. It makes it a lot easier because otherwise I'm just going, sometimes there's comments with each other. Once you get over the novelty of RGB-WW, I find myself mostly using my RGB lights in CCT or correlated color temperature white modes on shoots. I mostly just use RGB, a splash of backgrounds most of the time. Agreed, Tommy. And as I said, that's generally how I'm using them. It's nice to have those options. It doesn't mean that all of your fixtures need to be that way. In an absolute wonderful, great world, we acknowledge probably that 95% of the time we're going to be using bicolor white light in our productions. What's the ideal range? Probably about 2,500 to about 10,000 Kelvin. This would be the beautiful range for me in a light in terms of what I can produce with it. Add some effects. I'll use that for most of the things that I want to do. I'm already getting very warm and very cool or blue light with that, or more reddish orange to bluer. And that's going to be where I'm going to live on a light most of the time. And then I'm going to use that color for splashes, for effect, or for certain genres that you're trying to create artistically. So what else we got? Any thoughts about this? Great point. Yep. I'm ready. I don't know. It's question time. Q&A. Do you have questions about fixtures? Do you have questions about things that you're thinking about buying or renting? Do you have questions about lighting in different scenarios? This is a lighting thing. So it's your lighting questions answered, not let's just talk about lighting fixtures. So do we have any craft-based or anything like that that we want to discuss? I'm down for it. I got at least another 10, 15 minutes on this. If it starts to slow down, then I'll probably start to slow down the live stream. Oh, Chris, what's the wackiest thing or light that you've used to light a scene? That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, practicals, but to light a scene, nothing. I think more of it's just sort of the modifiers and kind of the shitty rigs approach to using things. It's like, you know, just identifying the space that you're in and figuring out what you're bouncing off of. Right now, I'm not saying this lighting's great, but I'm just using, for the most part, what's in this room, which is this lamp, which you can see right here, which has a shade on it. It's reading at about 3,300 Kelvin. And then I have an Aputure F7 sitting over here with a little thing on the end of the table. It's just a nano clamp with a spigot with a ball mount. And that doesn't go as warm as I'd like it to do. Oh, sorry, not 32. This is reading under 3,000 Kelvin. So this is about 27, 28. And I wanted this to go to that, but this only goes down to 3,200 Kelvin. And I'm just doing that to just create a little bit more fill. It's a little more dramatic when that's off, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Flex lights are probably the thing that are the most versatile when it comes to being able to light in different scenarios, flexible LEDs. The ability to just, I did a thing for Canon that I pitched to them a long time ago, which was with Ryan Connolly, and it was a C100 Mark II series that we did, where I went down to Texas. Ryan Booth was the DP. It was the first time that Ryan Connolly had ever used an outside DP on one of his projects, and it was this short film, this sci-fi short that he did, and it's all up on Canon's YouTube channel, so you can just look for Film Riot, you know, C100 Mark II. And I was on set with those guys, and they had all of their lights, cherry pickers, all this other stuff. Nothing huge. I think their biggest fixture was probably a Joker Bug 800. I don't know if they had a 1600, but they were using that as their gag for the UFO, and they got that up on a cherry picker. But there was something where, not only for our production, but there was something where they needed a light And what we did is we rolled up a flex light, a bicolor flex light, and we stuck it in between the rafters of basically the overhang of the porch, so that we could get light into a particular place. And I don't know if that's wacky, but it's just having that flexibility to do things, to be able to gaff tape lights to walls. That's pretty exciting. And now, in the old days, you would take a flex light and you put a grid that might have come off of a Kino flow onto that, which we've used on projects. But now you can actually get grids that just sit with Velcro right onto the lights. So those are pretty cool. Okay, wow, look at this. Chris, it's giving me an option to say if I want to show or hide your comment. I'm going to say show, because I had to now I have to say, is the episode for kids or not? I don't know about my shitty rigs. There's always shitty rigs, but safety first. The longer you do this, you still get a little shitty sometimes, but you want to make sure that you're safe. So Tommy says, I've been using a Lupo Super Panel full of full color 60 as a table light for product shots. Are there better options for table lights? Not sure, to be honest with you. The Lupo lights are great. I mean, really good, accurate color coming out of them. A little frustration with the Fresnels in terms of the placement of some of the knobs. But I like what they're doing as a company. I just think it's going to be incredibly competitive as time goes on there. You know, for me, it's how you modify it. So if I'm taking something that's a 1x1 or a 2x1 light, I want to make sure that there are options from outside companies or that company to make that light a lot bigger and a lot softer if I want to. For instance, if you're using an ASTRA light, without question, the ASTRA Big would be a good option, because I'm not interested in just taking a 1x1 and making it just slightly larger than the 1x1 and a little bit softer. What I really want to do is take a 1x1 and make it into a 2x3 or a 3x4 or a 4x4. And so soft boxes are great. Soft boxes with grids are even better, because when you're in smaller spaces and you want to create a larger source, Astra Big is about a 20x30, just slightly over. And it just fits right on there with no additional stuff. It's elastic. It just goes, you know, over the handles of the yoke and on the corners of the fixture. But then going with like a rabbit ear system from DOP Choice, you can actually put a 3x4 softbox onto an Astra. And that's pretty great. You can do the same with an S30C. They have rabbit ears where you can put two Astras together and then push those through a 3x4. And yes, you're paying money for that modifier, but what you can do with it in production on a regular basis is fantastic. Have you or anyone in the chat ever used smart bulbs like Hue and LISC as program practicals? I tried some of the original ones from not Panasonic. I'm going blank. They were like the standard ones that I bought from the store. Philips, the Hue lights, and they were okay. The app wasn't very, and the connectivity wasn't very reliable. I'm much more excited about what we're going to see from Aputure when it comes to smart bulbs and how we're going to use those, but with the Citus Link network and all that stuff. Quasar makes some great LED practicals that are wonderful to use, and they are dimmable. And when you're using dimmers with LEDs, you need to get an LED compatible dimmer, and even that doesn't always work. I have those dimmers in my house, and there are still lights that feel like they flicker a little or they buzz. So they haven't totally worked that out, at least for the home market. If you only had one light to light an interview, what would it be? Make sure you put the C47. I'm going to keep pushing that home. One light to enter light. I want a big source. So the light has to have a lot of output. Lights that I think of like that are travelable lights. This new Mix 150 from Nanlite, S30C, heavier but still good. The Gemini 1x1, I think we'll see a change. I think it's a great light. It's soft to begin with and has a lot of output. It's not quite enough output for outside unless you just need a little fill. But they've just recently redesigned the yoke. There was some problems with the yoke and the baby pin receiver on that. But I think it's good light. but I think that Mix 150 from Nanlite is worth looking at. I think this Aputure light will be, if we're talking under $2,000, and if I'm just traveling and I have to have something that is very portable, a 1x2 flex light is fantastic. Great that if it's RGBW, but the bicolor for me is like a go-to for sure. And what I want to do is I want to make it big. So I want to make it at least a 3x4 if I can, ideally a 4x. I carry a lot of modifiers with me now. So, you know, there's the DP kit that I designed for WESTCOTT, which has a lot of fabrics. I usually travel with at least one 6x6 silent light grid cloth, and I can just drape that over and between two C-stands or two bagged, you know, light stands, and I can have a 6x6 source, and it's beautiful for side keying, and it wraps really nicely. I can push an ASTRA 6X through that and get a lot out of that particular modifier. Good. So preferred way to light two talent interview setup, like a couple sitting next to each other. I like to create a little bit of shape. So I'd like to have my key coming from one side. You have to be careful. You might actually, if you have a big light, it might not matter because you'll have a little more fall off on one side rather than the other, but you get a really nice soft wrapped light. And that's a little bit more central lighting. It's coming more from camera. I tend to be a little bit more of a side lighting type person. I love really strong back key with front fill as well, but that's not usually practical in most of our shooting situations, but it creates a really beautiful edge on talent. And then what you do is you either get a nice return from that back key, and you know, put a big, maybe a 4x6, you know, bounce up above camera to kind of get some fill, or you can do the same thing and basically push lights into that and then change the intensity of the lighter lights to dial up or down that fill. You know, you can always go beauty lighting, which is essentially right above camera, and then you're pushing a light through that or bouncing light off of it if it's opaque, and just keep it neutral and then let that light come down. And that's nice because, you know, it's good for wrinkles and things like that, but it does feel a little flat to me, and I'm not a huge fan of that. If you're using a softbox and you're moving that key a little bit away on camera and you're moving it away from camera and you're lighting two people, you're going to get a little bit of, you know, additional light hitting the person closer to the key side. And what you can do is you can take like a 2x3 single or double net and you can feather that light a little bit off of a stand, and then you're going to basically even out the amount of light that's hitting both of those two people. And then, you know, you can have kickers or, you know, rim lights and things like that. What do you say to folks? I'm going to have to start wrapping this up just because I have to get ready for my flight. Say to folks who won't mix lights from different brands because they can't see a color cast, or what's the threshold of CRA, TLC, etc. when you say it doesn't matter? That's a big subject. I mean, the fact that we can get plus minus green in fixtures now is, I think, important. I do carry around this little meter here, which actually, this Lumu Power, this is a version 2, where they've changed the technology inside of it, so it's even more accurate in terms of reading color on this side. And then this is basically your incident meter for, you know, for light. And so basically what this does is it's designed to read modern LED fixtures and things like that. And what I oftentimes do is just plug this into an iOS device and take a reading of the color temperature, and then either match the other lights to that. I can also get a sense of whether or not it's got a plus minus green. This, I believe, is just skewing a little bit green. I'm not going to change anything. Technically, I could go in camera and also make an adjustment to essentially, you know, handle a little bit of that spike. The thing in real production is that what you're trying to do is you're trying to equalize. So if you find that your ambient color temperature that's being produced by, let's say, practicals, or even, let's say, there's a lot of natural daylight coming in, but there's a lot of green from outside and it's bouncing off of all the grass and everything else, and you're reading that and it's skewing a little green. Any lights that you add, you want to try to match that skew. as opposed to keep your lights for your subject matter being completely accurate. Because then as you start to adjust, of course, your image, you might be correcting that skew over in the background, but then you're taking your lighting and you're essentially pushing it into a direction that you don't want. So matching is probably the most important thing overall. Sometimes we have time to do it, sometimes we don't, but just good old fashioned gels are not bad to have in your kit, plus minus green, so magenta and green to help you do that. And at least a bunch of eighths or quarters, because it's usually little shifts that you're trying to correct. It's usually not a half or a full when you're doing things. All right, let's hold off on the rest of the questions. I'll get through these, and then we'll talk about lighting some more, many times in the future. Worst case scenario, Joseph S. Or example, it just happened to me. You get asked to shoot interior of people speaking and touring in an unfinished, no lights habitat house, one-man crew. What light do you bring? If you have 2 people, then you get a light like an Astra 6X with an Astra Big, which is not heavy, and you put a softbox on that sucker and you battery power it with gold mount or V-mount lock batteries, and you walk and talk. A China ball is also a great option for that to have, and there are various solutions out there, but basically you want a battery-powered, hand-holdable solution where you're putting soft light everywhere. If it's not skirtable, where you can flag light off of the China ball, you might want to go more with the softbox route and hand-hold that thing, and you're basically doing walk and talks, and that's really what you have. And color tunable, for me, bicolor is extremely important, because if you do encounter practicals and you then need to try to match your color or figure out some sort of contrast between subject matter and background, you have those options in the fixture. It's my biggest gripe with daylight only LEDs. I really want bicolor, which is why I think this new Aputure light that they're doing with some sort of proprietary approach to doing bicolor chip on board is exciting. What I mean is I'm using the light physically as the table. Oh, and illuminating it. I need a huge service that can support some weight and light up. I'll drop an image link as an example. I'm getting you, Tommy. So it's a little tricky, but I don't think they have them. I keep checking. I used to use frosted glass tables from IKEA, and now they have stupid like thumbprints in them or patterns. And the ones that they used to have were very affordable. You can actually get these made from glass manufacturers, and they're smooth on one side, and then they have frosted, sprayed on frosted glass on the other, and they're used for architectural stuff. I mean, I'm looking at the doors to my bedroom here, and that's frosted glass. And I think that your best option is to get a frosted glass table. Then what you do is you spray it down with stuff to basically protect it, so from fingerprints, so you can clean it later on, because that's the biggest issue with those tables. I forgot the product, but it's in a spray can. You lightly spray over it, and you basically you protect it so that when you wipe it down afterwards, you can get stains and things like that off of it. And you uplight it. And I used to do that all the time in my old studio in New Jersey, and it was fantastic. We would basically take a 2x1 or a Kino flow, and I just basically take 2 sawhorses, adjustable. I put that glass table on there, out of frame, the sawhorses, of course. And then what you do is you take duvetine, and you basically take black duvetine, and you wrap it around or skirt the whole thing, so that you're not getting spill outside, especially if there's talent there. If you don't care about that, then it's fine. And you basically just create a giant light table. There are some other things that are out there, though they're not quite as big, where there are these tablets that you can use that people put tracing paper on, and they can actually trace things. And they are really cheap, though I don't know how accurate they are in terms of color. I've looked at them in the past. And you basically, they're USB powered, they have built-in batteries, and they have pretty good sized ones that are like a Wacom or Wacom tablet. But they may not be big enough for the stuff you're doing. But I think frosted glass with a light source underneath that's pretty broad is really the way to go, Tommy, when it comes to that stuff. Not a question, but a thought. Snap grids for the Quasar are insanely overpriced. I agree, Corey, but there'll be other options. I don't use polecats. I use to basically go from floor to ceiling and basically attach grippage. And Kupo makes these great things that go onto pipes and stuff, where you can then put baby pins and stuff off of them. I think that auto poles are amazing. I don't use a lot of wall spreaders. It's not a big thing in the type of work that I do, and we generally don't have enough time to put something like that together. But auto poles are extremely useful, and some of them go quite high. For the strong backlight, would you push that through diffusion or keep it harsh? Rob, it really depends on the look and feel. I mean, if you're going noir or you're going something harder than that, then if you want it to be dramatic, obviously you would leave it pretty harsh. Probably through a Fresnel, you know, so you can spot and flood it a little bit. But usually through some sort of modifier, because you want that to be a strong back key generally, and to wrap around a big source, at least a 6x6 or 4x if it's out of frame and it's pretty close. But then you really have to think about that fill that's coming from the camera side as well. And first choice of diffusion for interview, it changes. I would say that like a half grid cloth for me is a go-to. I really like Magic Cloth, and you can buy it now from places like Modern Studio Equipment in different sizes. You know, my choices change, and if you're just using regular diffusion, like a 216 is always very nice. But I would say that if I'm buying a fabric, it's a half grid cloth is a good way to go, and I love that quality. I also love that if I'm bouncing off of something and then going into it. So take an unbleached or a bleached muslin and then bounce that off and then into a half grid cloth. In fact, my booklight kit for WESTCOTT is exactly that. There's an unbleached muslin on one side, and then there's a half grid cloth on the other, or you can put like a one-stop diffuser. But I like the half grid cloth, and I think that makes a beautiful booklight. My favorite bounce material that's inexpensive is beadboard, compressed styrofoam, and you can go to Lowe's and you can buy a 4x8 sheet of that, silver on one side, cut it in half, get two 4x4s, score it on the beadboard side after you peel off the coating, about halfway, bend it, line that with white gaffer's tape, put white gaffer's tape around it, and now you have a 2x4 bounce. You need a Quacker duckbill platypus clamp. Get one or two of those. They're also fantastic. You can use a duckbill clamp on a pancake apple box, and you basically just have a baby pin coming off of there, and you can attach a light like an ASTRA or something like that for a background light. It's been a pleasure, everybody. We actually went with an hour here. It's crazy. I don't know. I think we got some stuff done. Hopefully I answered some questions. It's been a pleasure, as always. And I'm sorry we're not doing an episode of Cameron Flask today. We will be back next week. I believe Ben is going to be hosting, and then it'll be back to me. Hopefully I've answered some questions. Hopefully I've had you think about some new stuff. And hopefully you are learning on this channel. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. If you are already a subscriber, please let people know about this channel and what I am doing and what we're doing as the C47. I look at the stats, and about 70% of the people who watch content on this channel are not subscribers. So we can grow this channel, but word of mouth is definitely going to be part of that until we get to numbers where the YouTube's says, hey, maybe I'll recommend a video from this numbnut, this Moulignon, Mr. Jem Schofield. And I never refer to myself in the third person, but I just did. But as always, all good stuff. I'm going to go pack up, get ready, go to the airport, and hopefully, knock on wood, I will get back home on time. And I like this one. I think there was good content here. And sometimes I don't always know that, or I'm not sure, but I feel like the questions were great, and we covered a lot of ground in this hour. So all the best. I'm going to go back to Lightstream here, which is going to allow me to just go to a logo. And then when I see that the logo's there, I'll cut the stream, and we'll be done. And that's a beautiful thing. And again, thank you, everybody. Spread the word, and I'll see you guys soon. And let me go ahead and push this to live.